Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 151. So today we are going to talk about the sneaky slithery slug of shame. Don't say that 3 times fast or you can try. I barely made it through once. The sneaky slithery slug of shame, that's what we're talking about today. And I'm going to tell you a story about how this came to me, and then we're going to talk a little bit about shame and how anger, grief, and shame are related. But I don't want to jump too far into that. I want to just get into my story. So I mentioned this a few weeks ago on the show that I'm participating in this EASE training. It's Equine Assisted Somatic Experiencing. It's run in partnership by my friend Barbara Collier here in Tucson, an amazing somatic experiencing therapist. And it is this program about sort of learning to find ease in the body through somatic experiencing with the help of horses. And I think I talked a little bit about this again a few weeks ago. So a couple weeks ago, I was at the second session of this and I had this really strange experience, and I've been processing it ever since and going through kind of like I do, excavating some other things. So I want to talk about what happened to me and then kind of get into this topic for today. So we were doing this really kind of deceptively simple, I will call it, exercise of setting our intention with a horse to ask the horse to take a couple steps back. And the direction was kind of to be really present in your body and just set the intention before you even touch the horse. And there were a couple horses, and one of them was more like you really kind of had to actually put your hand on the horse. And then the other one was a little more energetically sensitive, and through the course of me learning this exercise, like I got to the point where all I had to do was start to think about it and the horse would take a step back, which was really cool. But something happened to me during this exercise, and it took me a whole day to kind of figure out what happened. And there was a lot of layers of what was going on here. So we were doing this exercise and I was getting some direction from Barbara about kind of being more fully present in my body and sort of not, because I had come from the horse where you had to really sort of ask it to move, and to this horse that was much more sensitive. And so when I came on a little bit too strong. So there was kind of some stuff going on with that. But underneath the surface of that, there was a bunch of other things going on. And again, it took me like the rest of the day to figure this out. So I was trying to become more present with the horse. I was developing a connection with the horse. And then all of a sudden, the horse started sending me images of her own trauma. And I found it was really interesting because as this was happening, somebody was actually asking in the background, where did this mare come from? So the horse was showing me pictures, and then like right away I was getting confirmation of this by what the two people were talking about, which was really interesting. And I don't usually receive pictures. I'm more of a verbal person. I usually get words or feelings. I do sometimes get pictures, but this was like, it was like somebody painted a picture and held it up in my head. It was really intense and very clear. And I was a little bit surprised. I'm not sure why, because they've been talking the whole time about how sensitive and kind of psychic horses are. But so there was like multiple layers going on, and the horse started showing me these images. I'll get a little bit more into that. But ultimately what happened was I started having an emotional release. I started crying, and I had no idea why I was crying. And that's very unusual for me. I do a lot of this work. I do this work with other people. I hold space for other people to do emotional processing, to do trauma release, all of these kinds of things, somatic experiencing type work. And so I usually have a pretty good sense of what's going on. When I have my own release, it's usually, for me, the feelings kind of come up, I'm sort of processing them as they happen, and then I have this release. And a lot of times the physical energetic release is crying. That's a really amazing way to release energy. It's unfortunate that we've sort of stigmatized it in our culture. So, but in this situation, there were multiple things going on. I'm going to get a little more into that. But all of a sudden I was crying, and I even said, I don't know why I'm crying. I knew I was having a release, and I knew it was really powerful, but I didn't really understand emotionally what was happening. And luckily, I had the opportunity to kind of process with two different people that day who are both also body workers, like, I'm not sure what happened, and kind of go through this story. But it wasn't until I went to bed that night and I was lying in bed that I finally, the light bulb went off and I understood what had happened. So let me get a little more into that, and then we're going to get more into the topic. And it's hard. I'm trying to do the best I can to kind of explain this in a way that makes sense. But just understand, this wasn't happening in a linear fashion. Like, everything was sort of happening all at once. And I think that's partly why I had to kind of turn it and stretch it out later to figure out oh, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But in the moment, it was kind of all happening at once. I had developed this connection with the horse. The horse started showing me pictures and I started crying. So let's talk about what the horse was showing me and why eventually I figured out I was actually crying, what the release actually was. So the resistance I was having, let's start there, was to kind of coming fully into my body, to really being present in my body. And we talk all the time on the show about how trauma energetically kicks us out of our body. And so one of the reasons that Barbara really likes working with the horses is because they really do sort of demand that you are fully present in your body in order to respond. And they are fully present in their body. So it's a good way to kind of experience what that feels like. So what happened with this horse was, all of a sudden she was showing me this picture, and it was a picture of her in a pen with a ton of other horses, like crammed into this kind of pen. And there were people around with long whips that were just indiscriminately whipping them for no apparent reason. I mean, they were all contained. There was a feeling of just complete sort of helplessness in this situation. The horse was showing me and I was feeling her feelings, and and at the time it was kind of clear to me that it was sort of like she was showing me look at my trauma. I have also been mistreated. That's kind of how it felt. I have been treated poorly by other people, and it was painful to me. That's kind of what she was showing me. And then this is where the release kind of comes in, that again took me a long time to unpack what was happening underneath this. So I understood that. I saw it again right as this was happening, or just after. Somebody was actually saying this was a wild mare that had been captured by the Bureau of Land Management and mistreated. So I knew what she was showing me was true right away because somebody was actually saying it, which was an interesting sort of twist to this. And again, the picture was so clear. And it's making me emotional right now. I didn't understand why I was crying, what the release actually was, until later. And I realized that I was releasing shame. And I realized that what she was showing me was that despite this mistreatment, despite the fact that people treated her cruelly, she was not ashamed of that. She was not holding any shame in her body. There was no part of her that thought that was because of something wrong about her. We'll get into a little bit more about what shame is. And she was trying to communicate to me that I didn't need to hold this shame anymore. I didn't need to hold this feeling that there was something wrong with me, or that I somehow deserved the trauma that had happened to me in my life. And it was really, really powerful. And it was, again, deceptively simple. This deceptively simple activity led to this huge release that, again, took me the whole rest of the kind of day to figure it out. And why is that? It's because shame is a sneaky, slithery slug. It is very difficult to find. And as somebody, again, who professionally works with people on finding emotions in the body, figuring out what they are, I've gotten pretty good at knowing my own emotions. I did not know what this emotion was, because it is so sneaky, because it is so slithery, because it's this little kind of slug that hides in the shadows, and just when you sort of shine a light on it, it moves. We talk sometimes on the show about how anxiety is a difficult emotion to address because it bounces around. I would say that shame is similar in that way, because it's slithering around. It does not want to see the light of day. So first of all, let's define shame. We're going to talk about what is shame and how are anger, grief, and shame related, because this comes into my story as well as, I think, how to relate to this. Why is shame so sneaky and slithery and hard to pin down? So the best explanation I ever heard from shame, or about shame, goes something like this. And it kind of, because guilt and shame, they're both like feelings that are like, ugh, like something's wrong. Ugh, I don't feel good about something. And it's a little bit of, like, for me, anger, it's like a very powerful, like, ugh, there's this like, ugh, that goes with anger. And like sadness is, or grief is kind of like a weight or a heaviness. Shame is sort of this weird kind of nebulous feeling that like something's not right, but that if you look too closely at it, it'll be too scary. And so we don't really find it a lot of the times. It tends to hide under grief and anger. We'll talk more about that. But what is shame? So the best definition I ever heard was somebody who talked about the difference between guilt and shame, which kind of defines them both, I think, and also what's the difference. So this definition that I heard was that guilt is feeling bad about something you did. I did something wrong in this situation. I feel bad about what I did. I feel bad about my action. Shame is feeling bad about who you are. And this is kind of how this comes into play, and we'll talk about how it relates to grief and anger, because again, it's a very sneaky, nebulous little thing. It's that core feeling for a lot of us that we're not worthy, or that something's wrong with us, that we are flawed in some way. Where does this come from? That's where this sort of anger and grief come into this. So many years ago, when I was working with my mentor, Sherry Ford, she used to do workshops, and I saw her one-on-one. I went to a group setting, and then she would do these kind of, a few times a year, they would do special workshops. And so I went to this workshop. I was probably about 20 or maybe 21 years old, and it was called Anger, Grief, and Shame. And it never occurred to me until just now, when I've been working through this and finding all this other shame in my body, and figuring out, oh, I've been holding on to all this and not really even knowing what it was or how it got there, that it's related to anger, grief, and grief. Shame is related to anger and grief. And how does this work? And it's funny because I talk about excavation all the time, right? We're digging down. And I think anger is the top layer, grief is the layer underneath, and shame is at the bottom of this beautiful parfait of bad feelings. So let me give you an example. And I'm going to use this example, and we're going to get into the meditation. So you might start thinking about this for yourself as well. Because I think a lot of times shame starts when we are mistreated in some way, or we feel mistreated, when we're abused or mistreated, when people treat us poorly. And so the example I'm going to use, and I've talked about this before, I was a weird little kid, and I was picked on a lot as a kid. I was picked on by other kids. I was picked on sometimes by adults, pretty much through my whole childhood. So I had a lot of experiences of people treating me poorly. And so what happens in that is that we start to think there's something wrong about us. Why me? You know, there's 25 kids in this class. Why am I the one that is the butt of everyone's jokes? Why am I the one that everybody has chosen to pick on? And so on this deep level, we start to feel that there's something actually wrong with us. There must be something wrong with me, or people wouldn't be picking on me. But it's such, again, slithery, sneaky slug that gets buried very, very quickly under the grief and the anger. And it takes a long time for a lot of us to get down to that layer of shame. And it's a self-protective thing, because shame is about the most uncomfortable feeling we can have. And I think in part, it's because we are social animals, and our survival has depended on being in a tribe for such a long time. So one of the things that's at the root of shame is this feeling of not fitting in. And as you know, I've done a lot of work over the years. I know, like, the other kids who were picking on me, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. Everybody's trying to fit in. Everybody's trying to show that they're quote unquote normal. nobody wants to stand out and be the weirdo. So we're going to find the weird kid and all pick on them together. It's kind of like having a common enemy thing. So that way, okay, nobody sees my shame because they're picking on someone else. Nobody sees that I have something wrong with me. We're focused on this other person. So what happens when we start to kind of get to the point of working on trauma and we want to dredge up some things is that, again, the top layer, the most superficial layer above the shame is anger. I didn't deserve to be treated this way. How dare they? The nerve of these people. And it's righteous anger, Nobody deserves to be mistreated. Nobody deserves to be abused. And so the anger is righteous, but it's hiding the emotions underneath. Most of the time, anger is a mask for something like hurt. So when we start to excavate, I've been working with people recently on this and with myself, and it's really interesting how people want to hold on to the anger because the anger feels safe and the anger feels righteous, right? I didn't deserve to be treated this way. I'm going to be angry at this person. And if you never go deeper than that, you're not going to find the hurt that's underneath that. But underneath that layer of anger is the layer of grief. And the grief is the hurt around being, I didn't deserve to be treated that way. Man, that really, really hurt. There's a lot of grief underneath that when you are mistreated, when you are abused, because you didn't deserve it. And like mentally, you probably know that on some level, but that hurt exists in the body. It's held in the body. So as we excavate down, we get through the anger, then we find the grief. And this is the part that really surprised me in this whole story I just told. So right before this happened, I had gone to my friend Emily Heed, who's an amazing craniosacral therapist here in Tucson. And I had done a session where we had been focusing on some things that came up about this cruelty, people being cruel to me, and sort of places throughout my life where I felt like people had been cruel to me when I had really been kind to them. I try, no one's perfect, but I try to be a good person. I try to be a kind person. I try to treat people well, and that's not always reciprocated. And we had sort of, I don't do very well with anger anyway, so I tend to just live in the grief space anyway. But we had sort of excavated all this grief about how, I didn't deserve to be treated so poorly in a specific situation that's not important for me to go into here. But I didn't realize even in that session that there was something underneath the grief. And what's underneath the grief is the shame. Is that feeling of there must be something fundamentally flawed about me. There must be something wrong with me. And that is why I have been mistreated or treated cruelly or abused. I must have deserved it in some way. And again, it's such an uncomfortable place to go, because if you believe that there's something fundamentally flawed about you, how do you fix that? You can't. If there's a fundamental flaw in who you are or how you're made, there's no way to fix it. That fundamental word, it's kind of built in there. And so we tend to not look at it because we might have to admit to ourselves that it's true. It's not true. It's total horse poop, but it feels true and it lives in the body. And until we can find it, we can't release it, just like everything else. But coming from someone like me, again, who is a professional at these things, and I would tell you that I've gotten really good at recognizing emotions and knowing what emotions are. When I was releasing this shame in that situation, I had no idea what it was. I knew that it was powerful. I knew that it felt like a relief, like a giant weight being lifted off me. And when I checked in later and I was kind of thinking about this connection I had with the horse, animals don't have that shame. They don't have the complexity of the emotion in that way. And that's what I think she was trying to show me. She was showing me how horribly she had been mistreated and how she didn't take that on. That if anything, she had the anger, she had the grief, she had the fear of people, that, I don't trust people anymore. You see that in animals who have been mistreated. But she didn't take any of that on herself. She still understood that she was this majestic, amazing creature. And there was not this sense of something being wrong with her living in her body. And it was such an amazing gift. And also, it's so interesting because every time I think about it now, and I've been exploring these other areas of shame in the body, I see, for whatever reason, the haunches of this beautiful horse, like the beautiful, like her back end and her thighs and her strong legs and this just beautiful like curve and flow of her body. And I think, how can anyone think there was something fundamentally flawed about that? And if it's true for her, it must be true for me. It must be true for you. But again, the shame is so sneaky about hiding underneath all these other emotions that a lot of times, like I did that session with all this, where I went through all this grief. I was exhausted by the end of that, so it never occurred to me to look further underneath it. I think it primed the pump for what happened a few days later in this other session, which is why body work and somatic work is so important and why receiving help from other people is so important. This is really deep trauma release work. This is not work that you will successfully do on your own, most likely. This is work that you will need help with. What we're going to do in the meditation today is do a little bit, we're going to dip our toe in a little bit. We do that a lot. We're going to do a little bit of an exploration of this just to kind of find it and maybe get a sense of where it is in your body, how it feels. But I strongly encourage you to reach out for help to continue to work with this, to find somebody who does this somatic release work and work with them one-on-one to help you get through this. And there's a couple reasons for that. Again, it's really deep trauma work, and there's nothing better than having support. There's nothing better than being in a session with the person or a horse and having them show you and hold that space that you're not alone. It's an amazing, it's the reason that we live in a social environment. But if you've been hurt a lot in the past, it can be hard to reach out for that help. The other reason I'm suggesting that you think about getting help with this is because it is sneaky. So since this has happened to me, first of all, a few weeks ago, I talked about how I found this black fist of self-hatred, and inside was this little worm. That's where the slug thing came from. The sneaky, slithery slug of shame, of this feeling that there's something fundamentally flawed, that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not worthy, that I'm unlovable. All of that is shame. And as I've been exploring other areas of my body, what I've been finding, I've been doing a lot of deep release work in the last couple months, is that when I find an energy or an emotion in my body now, and I'm like, I'm not sure what that is. Like there's this energy in my thighs I've been working with, and it doesn't feel like anger. It doesn't feel like grief. It doesn't feel like anything I'm familiar with. Now I ask the question, is this shame? And I asked that the other day, and all of a sudden I felt this big whoosh go down my legs. Yep, you found your shame. And it, again, it's like anxiety in that first of all, it's held in multiple places, I think, but it's this slithery little kind of like sluggy creature that likes to live in the dark. I think it was Brene Brown who said the antidote for shame is vulnerability. So when you're able to shine a light on the shame, it pretty much dissolves. And the work that we do on this show all of the time is continually shining our light, shining our light, shining our light. So at a certain point, like when I find this belief, like, oh, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'm fundamentally flawed, I'll never be normal, I'm always going to be weird, whatever it is, right away I know that it's not true. Because I know that my true essence is that light of unconditional love. I know that. I embody that now. And so when I find it, I'm able to shine the light on it and let it go. But that is a process, and it takes time to get there. And if you're still dealing with active trauma and trying to release active trauma, you might still believe that little monkey mind voice, that little slug of shame that's telling you, oh, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're never going to be enough. You're never going to be lovable. No one really cares about you. No one really loves you. All of those little things that is the shame. That is the voice of the shame telling you that you're not good enough. And we believe it. Most of us believe that. And it's buried so deep that in order to get it out, we've got to dig down through the layers of anger, through the layers of grief, and finally find that. And it's so funny because it's such a little tiny thing. When I found that thing in my belly, it's just a little tiny, like 2 or 3 inch little slug that is really not scary. It's really not dangerous. It's not a big monster. It's not a big dragon. And it could be. I mean, depending on where you're at in your journey, it could feel like that. But when you really look at it, it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. You know, there's this big crazy man on the screen, but behind the curtain is just a little guy. And that's kind of what the shame is. And the more you shine your light on it, the more you're finally going to see. I finally saw, oh, this little slithery thing, well, I can get rid of that. I don't need to hold on to that. That's not real. That's not true. But lifetimes of programming that have told us we're not enough buries that shame in us so deeply that a lot of us never get to the point of excavating it. So, in today's meditation, we're going to do, we're going to dip our toe in the water. We're going to do a little bit of exploration of this. And I highly encourage you for this to use something that feels like it's not very deep. To purposely look at something that's fairly superficial or something that you've already worked through, rather than getting like deep down into the pit of like childhood abuse or something. We don't want to do that. You can get there later, but for this meditation, we want to feel safe throughout because we can't make change if we don't feel safe. And that's another reason why I think you have to reach a certain point in your trauma healing before the shame will even like show itself, because we can't make change when we're triggered. And there's nothing more triggering than finding this belief that tells you you're not enough or that you're unlovable. There is nothing worse than that. And I think it's at the root of most of our fear-based emotions is this shame root that tells us we're not good enough or that we're unlovable. So for this meditation, I want you to think of a time when somebody treated you poorly or someone was cruel to you, someone mistreated you. But I want you to think of something fairly superficial, like a work situation would be good. I'm going to do the thing with the kids picking on me as a child. That was very harmful and very traumatic, but I've done enough work on it now that it doesn't seem that way anymore. It seems like something that's mostly resolved. Find something that don't go to your childhood abuse, don't go to the worst thing that ever happened to you. You know, think about maybe a time when your coworker said something mean to you a couple weeks ago or however long ago, and it hurt. It felt uncomfortable. It was like, oh, that was mean. Why did you need to be so mean to me? Find something that's at that level. And again, when you're ready to go deeper with this, I encourage you to reach out for help, because I think this is something that you really need the support of a professional to excavate really fully. So what we're going to do today through this sort of superficial example is just, first of all, what does the shame feel like in your body? Because what happened to me was it was releasing, and I was just like, I know I'm releasing something. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what this is. And it's been a long time since something like that has happened to me. I usually, oh, that's uncomfortable. What's that? Oh, well, if I look at it, yeah, maybe that's a little bit of anger, or maybe that's rage, or like, oh, no, under that is the grief or the hurt. But it took me a whole day to figure out what that emotion was. So we want to just kind of explore that a little bit. And what we're going to do is excavate down through those layers. Somebody was mean to you, and you're angry about it. And you deserve to be angry about it when someone's cruel. We don't deserve to be mistreated. That's a little bit of righteous anger, and it's seductive. Because it's righteous, it's seductive. It's like, hey, stay here. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be angry. And that is a little bit of a defense mechanism of the ego telling us, don't go too deep because you'll find the shame. And then you have to confront this belief, this feeling you have about yourself that you're not enough or that you're unlovable, which is like, again, the ultimate discomfort. So we're going to find the anger, and then we're going to find the hurt underneath that. It might feel like grief or just hurt or pain. And again, we're going to look for this kind of in the body. And then we're going to just spend a little bit of time underneath that looking for the shame. And here is a clue that you're getting there in your kind of thought process. I'm giving a lot of explanation for this because I want it to feel like a really safe meditation. When you start getting to the why me question, that's when you're zeroing in on the shame. So I'll use my example. Kids picked on me when I was a kid. They called me weird. They said I was, whatever. They didn't like my clothes. We weren't rich. I didn't have nice clothes. I did weird things. I said weird things. I was a weird, precocious kid who talked like an adult, like all of those kind of things. So I could think of a specific example, or I could just think of it in general. And I can think as an adult now, man, those kids were mean. I didn't deserve that. There's the anger. What a bunch of, spoiled little brats that they treated me that way. It's hard for me to do that because I know, again, I'm too much compassion. Maybe, no, I don't think that's a thing. But, it was not coming from them being bad people. It was just coming from the way society is and that I was in a highly competitive environment. Anyway, I'm going to find the anger there. Then underneath that, I'm going to find the hurt. Man, it really hurt me that nobody wanted to sit at my desk and eat lunch with me. That was really hurtful. It was very lonely. And I'm going to try to find that in my body. I put my hand on my heart without even thinking about it. Okay, so I found that loneliness or that grief, that pain. When I start getting to the question of man, but why me? Again, there were 20 other kids in that class. Why me? Why was it me? Why did they pick on me? That is when you are starting to zero in on the shame. When you start to find that why me in your body, it's funny, I'm feeling it in my hips right now. That is when you are zeroing in on the shame. And stay with it because it's really, really uncomfortable because it wants to stay in the dark. It wants to live in the dark. It doesn't want a light to be shone on it. It doesn't want to be in the light. And we don't want to feel that feeling of, again, because if you think there's something fundamentally flawed about you on a very deep level, how do I fix that? I can't. It's not true. And when you shine the light on it, that's what dispels the shame is really looking at that why me? Well, why not me? It could have been anybody. Again, it was a tribal mentality. We're going to find the weakest person and we're going to pick on them. And that's going to make us feel better about ourselves. But the result of that is that poor little person ends up feeling this feeling of being unlovable or being unworthy. The craziest thing about this is that everybody feels that way. And the people who were picking on the little version of me, it was again, it's all a defense. Well, if I pick on that person, nobody will see how, crappy I am because I have this belief because my parents are mean to me or my older sister picks on me or whatever. Somebody has been bullied by somebody. Even the bullies get bullied by somebody. And so we've set this up in a way that we're kind of set up to fail. So remember that you are not the only one who feels this way. And that the more you shine this light, first of all, the more compassion you're going to have for when other people treat you poorly. Doesn't mean you have to put up with it, but you can have compassion for it. And the easier it is now, to identify. That's our goal, is to just where is this in the body? What does it feel like physically? Because again, it felt like I didn't want to be seen. That's how I'm going to say it. And it's funny because I was in this situation and there were other women there and they were watching me. And I do this a lot. I mean, I talked earlier this year about being in that craniosacral class and having this huge release and feeling shame about it afterwards. Oh, don't look at me. That vulnerability hangover. That's what Brene Brown calls that. When you feel like you've shown too much or you shared too much, you've been too naked in front of somebody emotionally, that is when that shame tends to trigger because it's oh, I let them see a part of me and now they're going to see that there's something wrong with me. They're going to know. People are going to know. But again, everybody feels that way. So I think it's time collectively to just start talking about this, start looking at it, start finding it in the body, start releasing it. We have important work to do. We don't have time to live in this place of self-doubt and thinking that there's something fundamentally flawed about us when there isn't. There just isn't. So let's meditate together. So for this meditation, you can sit up, you can lie down, find a really safe space. get really cozy, maybe wrap yourself in a blanket, prop up your feet or your knees. It doesn't matter what position you're in, you just want to be feeling really safe and really supported. And we're going to start, as we almost always do, with a few deep oxytocin breaths. We always want to signal to our body that we're safe. In order to do any kind of release, the body needs to feel safe. It needs to leave that fight, flight, or freeze mode and come into that rest and digest mode. So we're going to take a deep breath in through the nose, letting the belly float out strongly. We're going to sigh that breath out using an audible ha sound from high to low, vibrating the nerves that in turn vibrate the vagus nerve, telling the body that it's safe. So let's do that at least 3 to 6 times. Another great way to signal to your body that you're coming into this parasympathetic or rest and digest mode is what I call thymus rubs. So you can put your hand on your chest and just gently rub right above the sternum. You can also do a tapping motion, but I find the rubbing to be a little bit more soothing. That's a really good way to tell the body that it's safe. And if you get in any point in this meditation, if you get to the point where you're feeling unsafe, go back to the oxytocin breath and add this gentle thymus rubbing in, just telling the body that you're in a safe space. So after your last oxytocin breath, just release your breathing. You might want to take long, deep breaths or just let yourself breathe as your body is calling you to. Anytime any emotion comes up, it's great to go back to that in through the nose, out through the mouth breathing for release, or add the oxytocin ha. But just let this be intuitive here. And remember that we're doing this in a really safe way. We're doing this in a really safe space. We're going to just dip our toe into exploring where this shame is living in our body. So to start with, just think of a time when somebody was mean to you or cruel to you, when someone mistreated you. And again, I want this to be a fairly superficial thing. We're not going deep into childhood trauma or abuse here. This is like somebody said something mean to me and it hurt my feelings. Maybe it was at work, maybe it was someone in your family. Just let that scenario come into your mind now. Usually the first thing that comes to you intuitively is right, but you can give yourself a minute or two here, just kind of explore, think about a situation in which somebody was unkind to you and it hurt, it felt uncomfortable. Maybe you got angry, maybe you just felt hurt. We're going to get into the details of the emotion a little bit, but first just kind of find that scenario. Give yourself a moment for that. Remember, you can come back and repeat this as often as you'd like. If you're going to start exploring some of those deeper traumas or any kind of abuse, please reach out for help. Please reach out to a somatic therapist, a somatic trained trauma-informed body worker, a mental health professional. We're just sticking with something that feels just a little bit uncomfortable today so we can dip our toe in this water. So once you've got the scenario in mind, take yourself back there and just notice first of all if you felt angry. That tends to be the top emotion. You may have skipped right down to hurt, but maybe you thought, how dare you? How dare you treat me this way? How dare you say that to me? I could say the same thing about you. Those kind of thoughts, just kind of find the anger. And if there's anger about this situation, just scan through your body now. Notice where in your body is the anger experienced. Is it in your chest? Is it in your belly? Maybe you feel a little bit like a punch to the gut. Maybe you feel your pelvic floor and your hips clenching up in anger. You feel your fist kind of clenching up. Just notice in the body where that anger is living. Notice how it feels. And then invite it to release. This is a situation that you don't need to be holding on to. Maybe the other person was just having a bad day. Maybe they're just an unhappy person and they're mean to everyone. So take a nice deep breath in through the nose, sigh it out through the mouth. I'm going to assist with a little Reiki and sound here. We're just releasing this anger, letting it go from the body for the highest good. If it doesn't feel like it's releasing, that's okay. You can always come back and release and repeat this for release. Oh, sheneke ahi e ana uya e aha e ya e aha e o ya ya ushe ana e a uya e ya e ya. Letting go of that anger. Maybe there wasn't any anger to begin with, that's fine. Maybe it's still here, that's fine too. We're just exploring, doing a little emotional spelunking. So come back to the scenario and now find the hurt, find the grief or the pain. Whatever this person said or did in this situation, if you were angry, it's because they hurt you. It's because they touched a nerve. So find the hurt in the situation. Figure out where it lives in your body. Again, it might be chest or belly. It could be anywhere. It could be in your toes, in your ears. Just let yourself be intuitive about this. You can kind of scan from the top of the body down. And when you ask a question in your energetic field, it has to give you an answer. So you can also say, where does this hurt reside in my body? Where is this living? And if you get a little twinge, a little bit of pain, discomfort, that's your answer. I asked that question and immediately my hips tightened up and my glutes. So that's my answer. So maybe bringing your hands to that area of the body, if you can reach it. If not, you can kind of just direct your hand down toward wherever it is. If it's not comfortable to have your hands there, that's okay. You don't need to do that. I can just assist. And bringing a little bit of movement here. This grief or hurt tends to hold on a little tighter than the anger. Not always, but just a tendency. So maybe doing just a little bit of wiggling in this area. Maybe you're rubbing your chest or your belly, your low back, wherever you found it. Just doing a little bit of movement here. And again, setting the intention to release this hurt. This is not serving you, certainly not serving the situation to hold on to this hurt. Assisting you here with some Reiki and some sound, just setting the intention to release this hurt. Say ya ya we ya o. Say ya we o. Say. Giving yourself a moment here, just noticing if there's been a shift. If not, that's fine. Noticing if that anger has released, noticing if the hurt or the pain, the grief has released. Maybe you're just more aware of that part of your body and it feels even more uncomfortable. That's okay. That's not going to last forever. Remembering that you can come back and repeat this as needed. And now we're going to excavate down further to that slithery, sneaky slug of shame. Where is the shame held in your body? When you find that feeling of why me, that feeling of I didn't deserve that, what's wrong with me, that is zeroing in on the shame. And the why me is a great question. So if you ask yourself, you can ask yourself, where is this shame stored in my body? Again, you might get a twitch or a pain or a little area of discomfort. You can also ask that question, why me? And notice if that shows up somewhere in your body. Where am I holding the why me? It can also be a little bit of a feeling of victimhood too. Oh, poor me. Poor me. What is it about me that people seem to be mean to me? What is it about me? People can be mean to me. Oh, poor me. It can masquerade as that kind of victimhood as well. So again, just looking for where that's held in the body. You might even picture a little slimy slug. Where's that slug crawling around in your body? If you're not getting a sense of that, that's okay. You may need to repeat this a few times before you find it. Maybe in the same place as the hurt or the anger, and maybe in a totally different place. So just exploring that. And now I want you to get really focused on this little slug. Maybe shining a flashlight on the slug. And I want you to ask the slug, what is the mistaken belief the slug is telling you? It's something around worthiness. It's something around being unlovable. It's something around something being wrong with you. Just ask it, what is this slug's message of shame to me? And we're going to create an affirmation that opposes that. As we do the energetic work, we're going to add this mental affirmation work to kind of help salt the slug of shame, to kind of dissolve this little slug. So, for instance, this is going to be most powerful for you to craft your own. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. If your slug of shame is telling you, you'll never be lovable, you're not lovable, then you're going to craft an affirmation. I am fully lovable. I love myself. Something like that. And the more meaningful it is to you, the more of that energy it's going to shift. If the slug said something to you like, you'll never be worthy of love, you'll never be worthy of attention, something like around worth, I am fully worthy of whatever it is. My worth is inherent. So just take whatever that slug phrase is and reverse it with something that feels empowering. It may not feel true to you right now. That's okay. That's why we make affirmations. That's why we practice this in a safe space and include energy work to empower the affirmations. So as we step into the energy work here, you might imagine that you're holding this slug or that you're holding a flashlight on it. I want you to use that affirmation out loud if at all possible. Just direct this energy at your little slug of shame. Say I o ooh yeah, say I o, say I, say I, say directing your attention, your energy at this area of shame, visualizing it as the slug, if that's helpful. If you're not sure where it is in the body, you can just imagine that you're holding the slug out in front of you. But try to get a sense of where this is. Try to get a sense of what it feels like, this really deep discomfort, this really deep feeling of not wanting to be seen, of not wanting to be truly known because someone will find out the secret of this shame, that you're not worthy, that you're not lovable. And recognize that it's not true. Recognize that we're all holding a little aspect of this or a large aspect of this, and it's not true. You are inherently worthy. You are inherently loved. You are so precious. to the universe, to that source, that unconditional love that is your nature. There is nothing flawed about you. You are perfect, exactly made in the way that you were meant to be in this lifetime. It doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that you don't make bad decisions sometimes. But those are the things that you do. They are not who you are. Who you are is a light. Who you are is unconditional love. Who you are is luminous. Completely worthy, so loved, so cherished. The universe rejoices in your presence. Let yourself feel that even a little bit in this moment. The universe rejoices in your presence. You are loved. You are worthy. The universe rejoices in your presence. You are loved. You are worthy. Allow yourself to fill up with that love now. Fill up with that light, that worthiness, coming into all the cells of your body, coming into that mental space where you may have a voice still telling you that it's not true, coming in to all the joints of the body, all the organs, all the muscles, the skin, all parts of you now radiating this feeling of worth, this feeling of being perfect exactly as you are. You can stay with this as long as you like. You can come back and do this as many times as you like until it starts to feel true. And know that it may take some time, but it will feel true because it is true. Say hi, taking a deep breath now in through the nose, sighing it out through the mouth, adding that audible ha sound if you'd like. Just gently coming back to the body. If you're in a space where it's safe to do so and you'd like to drift off to sleep, you can let yourself float off on this cloud of love and light. If you're coming back to the rest of your day or evening, just allowing yourself to come back to your conscious mind, maybe placing a hand on the heart, gently rubbing over the sternum, very gently stimulating the thymus, stimulating that vagus nerve, just reiterating how safe you are. You are so precious and loved, and if we understood that, the world would be a different place. So let yourself feel it, even if it's just for a moment here. Begin to slowly move your fingers and toes, maybe moving your neck, just coming back. Be slow. Sat Nam. The truth of your identity is that you are a precious, valued light in this universe. Never ever forget that. You are so loved. Take one or more deep breaths here. Just coming back to yourself, and as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me. Know that you are loved. Know that you are worthy. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.